Hey everybody, so last night in the Sword Coast Chronicles, the party actually met two new characters. They met and I started with kind of a cold open and a little bit differently because I wanted to get the new characters on stage right away. There's a tendency I have noticed in some of my games, if there's a new character coming in, sometimes if I start up with the main characters that are already there, it sometimes takes me a while to work the new people in. So what I did is I wanted to reverse that. I did a recap for the players, and before the game, I told the current players, all right, I'm going to do a recap, and it's going to sound like things are slightly different than the way you remember them happening, but just go with it, because my goal is to get the new characters on screen immediately. They said, all right. So our first new character is called Desarius, and Desarius is a Firbolg Druid. And because it's a Druid, it has the shape change ability, and because it's a Firbolg, anytime it's around people, it usually uses that shape change because Firbolgs in Barovia, they tend to make people panic a little bit. And so, because, all these people are superstitious enough, you see some big 7'10" tall creature running around, all hairy and everything, that's going to make people go, oh, crap. So, we started at the Vistani camp, where we were before, and I narrated how the party, how this Firbolg, who was sort of in the edge of the woods, on the edge of the camp, how it saw the four party members come into the camp and meet with Lugash, and then Lugash took them into the big tent. And then behind those four characters, the Firbolg sees a fifth character, a new person, a woman. This was the second new character. And this character is a guest player, meaning that she's somebody that's not going to, at least right now, she's not going to be in the campaign full time. And this character is not intended to be in the campaign full time, because this character is an NPC from the storyline. This is Ireena Kolyova. So what I did is I talked to the player. The player is Ivy, who plays in my Sunday game. She plays Elora in the Sunday game. I gave her some backstory from the adventure. Well, here's what Ireena knows before she meets the party. Here's what has happened to her, and here's why she was in Vallaki instead of being over in the town of Barovia, where she's normally encountered, because the party's not in Barovia. And I had a good way in my mind to get her from Barovia to Vallaki and have that be integrated with NPCs that the party has already met, although they did not appear on screen for any of this. And I told her to go back and listen to part of the previous session, because she was, in my game, she was at the Blue Water Inn, and she heard the ravens going crazy upstairs, and she woke up early in the morning, and she went over and she witnessed that entire conversation between the party and Rictavio that happened in the last session. So I had her go and listen to that whole piece so that she would know what Rictavio had told the PCs and knew a little bit about the PCs and why they were there. And So I told her that she had had some interactions with Rictavio prior to the PCs being there, and that Rictavio came across as a little bit sketchy. He's an old man, and Ireena is a young, pretty girl, so it's kind of like that. All right, you may be a little bit of a creeper. You sound strange, but you might be a little bit of a creeper. You might be telling the truth with all this stuff about me being in danger. And certainly I know, as Ireena, I know the crap that's been going on before. The attacks, the visits in the night by Strahd, the fact that I've been bitten twice already by this vampire, and the fact that my brother wanted me to get someplace safe. But now I get to Vallaki where it's supposed to be safe, and you're telling me that the wards on the church here in Vallaki are no longer in place. Yes, I've been to that church. Yeah, I feel a little creepy in that church. And you're telling me the reason I'm feeling creepy is because the wards are down. But you say, oh, over in Krezk, there's a place. I'm not sure I entirely believe you. But now you are talking to these other adventurers. Ooh, well, maybe there's safety in numbers. I know at least they're trying to get the hell out of here. And getting out of here sounds like a good idea to me. So I'm going to creep out of the inn and follow them over to wherever they're going, this Vistani camp they talked about going to. So she kind of creeps around the edge of one of those little dusk elf houses, and the Firbolg sees her. So the Firbolg uses the change shape and goes into the shape of like an Irish hound, and then goes loping over to this Ireena and starts interacting with her. Of course, in dog form, the druid doesn't talk, just acts like a dog. And so then the party comes out of the big tent, because I basically said, okay, all that stuff you guys talked with Lugash last week, that just happened inside the tent, and now you're free to do whatever you were going to do anyway. And they're like, oh, okay, fine. So they come out of the tent, and I had Ireena roll a stealth check, which she nailed, and so beat all of their passive perception, so they didn't notice that she was there. And they start going off to do that, and so she starts following them. And now the dog is with her. And so they got to some other place, and Ireena said, well, I want to kind of just hang back here and try to watch them. And Heather, who is playing the Firbolg in dog form, she says, well, I'm just going to sort of hang out here with her, and I'm just going to put my head up like I want to get scratched and everything. Okay. All right, well, in that case, both of you make stealth checks again. And they both horribly failed their stealth checks. So now everybody in the party with their passive perception, now they notice, oh, there's a dog over there. Oh, and there's a woman over there. I haven't seen her before. What's going on with her? So Falliger, the bard, elects himself to go and find out what this woman is all about. And, eventually she comes back. Meanwhile, the party is building this crucible with a pot that they bought from the Vistani to melt some silver so that they can coat more weapons. And it's like, yeah, I just decided that, first of all, Paul, who plays Krenraid, he has smithing tools. He has a background, as an artisan, stonemason, and smith, and those types of things and whatnot. So, and then also he did a lot of real-world research on how you would melt down silver and use it to put on a weapon. Well, actually, not. I don't guess he did research on how to put it on a weapon, but he did a lot of research on how you would build a crucible to do this. And I said, all right, you went and did all of that work, so I'm going to give you some bonuses on this. And he rolled just fine, so they melted down a bunch of silver coins, and they were able to coat some of their weapons with silver, some of their additional weapons. And meanwhile, this Ireena comes up with the dog, and she tells him, "Oh yeah, that's my dog. His name is Maxwell." And and so everybody's like, "Insight check." And they kept rolling horribly on their insight. And so it was like 2 or 3 insight checks in a row that they all just failed. And so she was just kind of stringing them along with some of this not quite true stuff that she was telling them. And it took them maybe a couple of hours to do all the stuff and melt down the silver and get the weapons coated and do all this kind of thing and whatnot. And so then they decided, well, we've heard our friend Rictavio talk about this Krezk place. Let's go check it out because we can get there easily during the day. And so they run off, going down the road, and the dog starts off with them. Now, I think Heather had figured out that she could stay in dog form for like 3 hours. So they had spent about 2 hours of that there at the camp. And then as they started going down the road toward Krezk, she says, well, as the dog, I just sort of hang back a little bit. And I do that dog thing where, kind of sniffing around on the road as we're walking, and then occasionally run over to the side of the road and kind of look into the woods like maybe there's something that's caught my attention or whatnot. And then I'll just sort of trot along behind. So she's falling behind, or the dog is falling behind the group as they're going down the road. And they eventually see the wagon up ahead of them, the big colorful wagon that is Rictavio's wagon. So they know that Rictavio has indeed left already and is heading toward Krezk. And so they are coming along behind to catch up to him. And about the time they catch up to him, they look around and the dog isn't there anymore. And then they look around a little bit later, and what they see is this big loping bipedal creature. A couple of the party have heard about Firbolgs, but they had never seen them. And they did some checks, and they realized, from what they have read about the different races and what they're seeing there, they realized, oh, that's a Firbolg. So they didn't immediately panic, but they were startled seeing that. And what they were really startled by is the Firbolg's animal companion. Now, there's a creature that I knew was probably not ever going to show up in our version or in the time that we were in the storyline for Curse of Strahd. And this creature is a giant goat called Sangzor. Sangzor is a mean-tempered goat. I mean, it's really, really, really mean-tempered. And I said, you know what? You've been here for a while. Firbolg. The Firbolg's name is Dez, or Desarius. I think I said that before. I said, Desarius, you've been here, trapped here in Barovia for a while. So you at one point had a chance to interact with this goat, and it has now started to be your companion. And so when the Firbolg shows up on the road, they look, and this giant goat is is striding along beside it. The giant goat is 9 feet tall at the shoulder. The Firbolg tops out at 7'10". So it's this giant of a person walking next to this even more humongous giant of a goat. A goat the size of a small elephant, basically. And so that was the first time they realized that, oh crap, there's this other person. And so Mulek immediately throws out 2 of the little furballs from his bag of tricks, and it turns out one is the jackal and one is the tiger. And he just says, okay, defend our group. And I tell the Firbolg, I tell Dez, all right, you see one of them throw these 2 furballs out, and one becomes a full-grown tiger, the other one becomes a full-grown jackal, and then they do that thing. You're a druid, you understand what it means when animals act a certain way. They do that thing like where they're kind of like going into mama beast mode, where like the party are their cubs, and it's like, okay, we're not going to come after you and attack you, but if you start threatening our cubs, you're going to be in trouble. Yeah, and she's like, oh yeah, okay, I get that. The druid understands that. But they start interacting with the druid. They find out who he is. They realize then, after a bit, that, oh, the druid was the dog. The dog we had been talking to all the time. Or the dog that had been there when we were talking in the Vistani camp. That's actually this druid. Oh, that's really cool. And they find out a little bit about the druid, why the druid is there. Because I gave, obviously for Ireena, for Ivy, who was playing Ireena, I gave her some information about the plot that the party didn't yet have. Then for Heather, who was playing the Firbolg, I gave her other information about the plot of Curse of Strahd that they didn't have. So very little of both of those have come up so far, but these 2 new, the new PC and the new NPC, have information that they can give the party along the way. And we finally got to Krezk, and towards the end of the session, and Rictavio asked to speak to the Burgomeister, and the Burgomeister came out and seemed very kind of down in the dumps, and did not seem horribly pleased about something about the abbot up on the hill has kind of annoyed him, and the party hasn't quite figured that out yet. But off screen, well, I should say, Rictavio went off to the side and had a whispered conversation with the Burgomeister, and all the party, they just rolled horribly on their perception checks, so they couldn't overhear what that conversation was. So, oh well, they were not going to be able to understand that. Oh, and by the way, when they got to the town, the druid sent the goat off and turned back into the dog form again. And Mulek sent the tiger and the jackal off into the woods, because they are going to remain a tiger and a jackal until the next dawn, at which point they just go back to wherever they came from, and the fuzzballs are back in the bag of tricks. So that's the way that bag of tricks works. You can only use 3 of those balls every day, and so he had used 2 of them just because, oh crap, we might have trouble here. It turns out that they didn't. And then the last thing that happened is they wound their way up the steep hill at the back of the village to the gates of the Abbey, because the Burgomeister had been trying to get the abbot to come down into the town for some reason, and the abbot hadn't been answering his requests. So definitely wants to try to get the abbot to come down into the town. And that's kind of the leverage that they use to get their way into the town, so that maybe they can help get the people, or get the abbot back down. So we're at the gates of the Abbey, and that's where we ended the session last night. Tune in next week, where we'll find out exactly what's happening at this Abbey. whether this abbey is indeed a place that might be some sanctuary for Ireena, because Rictavio seems to think that it will. And she's certainly going to hope that it will be, because if Strahd shows up one more time and bites her again, ooh, well, that's kind of the end of Ireena as an independent NPC. Ireena then becomes a thrall of Strahd at that point, and she definitely doesn't want that to happen. So, and a couple of things about the way what I did with Ireena. Because the party is 7th level, I looked at the way Ireena's stat block is, and she's supposed to be a noble with 14 hit points. And that just doesn't fit with a 7th level party. She also is depicted as somebody who is supposed to be smart and capable, and yet she's kind of depicted as helpless. I didn't like that. So what I did, I changed her stat block around, and instead of having her be a noble, I had her be a veteran, which means that not only does she have a better armor class and significantly more hit points, it's like she's an armor class 17 and 58 hit points, which is more hit points than some of the people in the party, but she also has 3 weapons. She has a heavy crossbow, she has a long sword on one hip, and she has a short sword on the other hip. And if and when she has to get into combat, she can make 2 one-handed attacks with the long sword, and if she has it out, she can make a 3rd one-handed attack with the short sword. Or, if she doesn't have that out, she can make 2 attacks with the long sword, either one-handed or two-handed. Or, of course, she could shoot from range with that crossbow. So I wanted to make her a bit more of a capable party member and something of a badass, a female badass. I didn't want her just to be, oh, please help me. Now, that makes sense if you are starting the adventure and you're in the village of Barovia as a 1st or 2nd or 3rd level party. You don't want somebody who's going to outshine the party as an NPC. You want somebody that's a little bit less than the NPCs. But looking at everything that's happened to this character, and at the point of the story, I had these guys meet her. To me, it just made sense to bump her stats up and make her a little bit more of a capable fighter. Another thing that I've noticed about our time in Barovia, none of the players are complaining, so that's good, but this is like our 4th or 5th session in Barovia, and we really haven't had a combat yet. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, like, there's never really been a great reason to force a combat on the characters. There have been opportunities that they could have gotten into a fight, but they chose not to. Definitely when they were in Lady Wachter's house, there was all that stuff going on in the room next door to where 2 of the PCs were with the daughter. And they could have gotten into a scrap with the servants in the house, but they just chose to ignore that. I was thinking about potentially having a combat on the road when they were going from Vallaki to Krezk, but they've got there's Rictavio with them. There's the giant goat with them. There's the 2 animal companions with them. I thought, okay, in order to make this any kind of a challenging combat, I'd have to throw so much at them that it would wind up just being this big, huge, long combat that would disrupt the story. And everybody was having so much fun trying to figure out what was going on with these two new characters that they met, and the little bits and pieces and hints that Rictavio was dropping in the conversation that they were all having, that they were just like much more interested in finding out what was going on there, and it felt like it really would have been an interruption to that to throw a combat at them. So yeah, there's lots of potential for a combat in Curse of Strahd, and I feel like I kind of need to have a combat for them fairly soon, but it also is a situation where I have to feel like that combat is earned and not just forced on them. I'd rather have that feel more natural. So I'm doing a little work to figure out exactly where and when that combat can show up and what that combat is going to be. I have an idea. But we will see. We will see. Okay, that's going to do it. Thank you guys for hanging out and chatting with us a little bit today, spending some of your time. I hope that we will see you back here next week, and please join us Thursday night, 7:30 p.m. over on Twitch for the next session of the Sword Coast Chronicles. Thanks so much, everybody. Good night now.